0200 hours, outer perimeter of Manzanillo Harbor. A dense, low-hanging fog rolls off the Pacific, masking the transition where the deep black of the ocean meets the rugged Mexican coastline. The surface of the water remains eerily flat, disturbed only by the gentle, rhythmic pulse of the tide against the jagged rocks of the breakwater. Far off in the distance, the amber lights of the port city flicker through the haze, casting long, distorted reflections that dance across the dark swells. There is no wind, only the heavy, salt-laden air that hangs over the silent silhouettes of anchored merchant vessels. Deep beneath the surface, the silence is absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic hum of electrical systems. Inside the steel pressure hull of the submerged vessel, red battle lights bathe the control room in a bloody, artificial glow. The air is cool and smells faintly of recycled oxygen and machine oil. Dozens of operators sit motionless at their consoles, the soft green light of sonar screens reflecting in their unblinking eyes. They move with practiced, glacial precision, adjusting dials and monitoring pressure gauges as the massive submarine glides through the thermal layers. The tension in the room is a physical weight, tightening the chests of the crew. The commanding officer stands behind the sonar stack, his boots bolted to the deck plating, his gaze fixed on the digital waterfall display. A single green line pulses on the screen, marking the acoustic signature of the pier foundations ahead. The target is locked. He does not speak. He only nods to the weapons officer. The mechanical clank of the torpedo tube outer doors opening vibrates through the entire frame of the ship. It is a dull metallic thud that signals the end of the quiet. The heavy torpedoes slide out of their tubes with a violent hiss of compressed air. They transition from the warmth of the tubes to the freezing depths of the harbor in a heartbeat. Their propellers bite into the water, spinning up to a high-pitched, predatory whine that echoes off the harbor floor. On the surface, the first sign of the coming storm is a series of frothing white wakes cutting through the glassy water like knives. They move with terrifying speed, heading straight for the concrete pilings of the first command post. The lead torpedo slams into the reinforced concrete foundation of Command Post 1. The impact is instantaneous and catastrophic. A massive pillar of white water and pulverized stone hurls 300 feet into the air, illuminated by a blinding orange flash from deep within the structure. The shockwave ripples through the harbor, snapping the mooring lines of nearby ships like pieces of string. The ground beneath the command post simply vanishes as the heavy warhead vaporizes the structural supports. The building groans, a sound of screaming metal and cracking stone, before it tilts violently toward the sea. Inside the crumbling structure, the floor becomes a vertical wall. Desks, computers, and jagged shards of glass hurl across the room, crushing anyone in their path. Officers are thrown like ragdolls against the reinforced walls, their screams drowned out by the roar of the collapsing roof. Fire erupts from severed gas lines, engulfing the interior in a searing backdraft that sprays out of the shattered windows. The command center, once a hive of digital activity, is now a burning carcass of steel sliding into the black water. On the bridge of a nearby patrol boat, the captain is thrown onto the deck as the first shockwave hits. He scrambles to his feet, yelling frantic orders into a dead radio. He watches in horror as the second and third explosions erupt further down the line, leveled in quick succession. Huge chunks of the pier are hurled into the sky, falling back down like meteors onto the panicked harbor workers below. The air is suddenly filled with the deafening roar of fire and the acrid stench of burning fuel and scorched earth. The systematic destruction of the command infrastructure has begun. 0215 hours, Manzanillo Pier Sector Delta. The secondary perimeter of the port is a landscape of shifting shadows and industrial skeletons. Massive gantry cranes stand like frozen giants against the smoke-choked sky, their steel cables swaying in the heat haze rising from the first impact zone. The smell of ozone and pulverized concrete fills the air, heavy and suffocating. Emergency sirens begin to wail from the city center, a thin, lonely sound that struggles to compete with the crackle of growing fires. Armed guards at the remaining checkpoints grip their rifles with white knuckles, their eyes darting toward the churning water of the harbor. The tactical situation on the ground dissolves into a frantic scramble for survival. Intelligence officers inside Command Post 2 and 3 hover over their monitors, watching the playback of the first explosion until their screens go to static. The floorboards vibrate with a rhythmic, low-frequency throb, the acoustic signature of more incoming heavy torpedoes. A senior officer screams for an evacuation, his voice cracking with desperation. He lunges for the heavy steel door, but the floor beneath him heaves upward as if struck by a subterranean hammer. The second wave of torpedoes impacts simultaneously. The twin explosions are so powerful they create a momentary vacuum. pulling the surrounding air into a ball of white-hot plasma before expanding outward in a devastating overpressure wave. Command Post 2 is lifted off its foundations, the entire three-story structure hovering in the air for a fraction of a second before it is shredded by the blast. Steel beams are twisted into knots, and concrete walls are reduced to a fine gray powder that sprays across the wharf. Command Post 3, located 50 yards away, is engulfed by a wall of fire as its fuel storage tanks ignite, sending a mushroom cloud of black smoke billowing into the night. Human carnage follows the shockwaves. Soldiers and port technicians are hurled through the air like autumn leaves, their bodies slamming into shipping containers with bone-breaking force. Those caught in the immediate blast radius are vaporized, leaving only charred shadows on the remaining fragments of wall. Survivors crawl through the debris, their faces masked in blood and soot, their mouths moving in silent screams as the roar of the fire robs them of their hearing. Medics attempt to rush toward the ruins, but the heat is so intense it melts the plastic on their gear, forcing them back. From the deck of a nearby frigate, the tactical response officer watches the sensors in disbelief. He slams his fist onto the chart table, screaming into his headset for a depth charge pattern to be laid, but there is no target to lock onto. The harbor is a graveyard of acoustic clutter and debris. He watches on the thermal feed as the foundations of the 4th and 5th command posts begin to glow white on the display. He knows the trajectory is perfect. The enemy is not attacking the ships. They are amputating the brain of the entire coastal defense network. The aftermath of the second strike is a vision of hell. The once ordered rows of the port are now a jagged graveyard of burning wreckage. Flaming oil slicks spread across the water, illuminating the floating debris of uniforms, paperwork, and shattered office furniture. The 7th command post, the largest of them all, stands silently at the end of the pier, its windows reflecting the inferno consuming its neighbors. Its occupants can do nothing but wait for the inevitable vibration beneath their feet. 0235 hours, the southern industrial terminal of Manzanillo Port. The air here is thicker, choked by the oily black plumes drifting from the north. Shadows cast by the massive, motionless cranes stretch long and jagged across the asphalt. A terrifying, unnatural quiet settles over the sector, broken only by the distant, rhythmic clanging of a loose metal sheet banging against a warehouse wall. The water in the slips is no longer flat. It undulates in heavy, nauseating swells, carrying the charred remains of the previous sectors. Armed sentries stand atop the roof of Command Post 4, their thermal optics scanning the dark water with frantic, jerky movements. The tension snaps as the sonar buoys in the basin ping a frantic, high-speed warning. Deep beneath the surface, the next pair of heavy torpedoes adjust their trim tabs, their onboard computers calculating the precise stress points of the reinforced seawall. Inside Command Post 4, a communications sergeant hurls his headset against the wall as the floor begins to hum with a low-pitched, bone-shaking vibration. He dives beneath a heavy oak desk just as the pressure wave hits. The torpedoes strike the base of the pier with synchronized fury. The explosion does not just shatter the concrete, it liquefies the very soil beneath the structures. A massive geyser of mud, seawater, and jagged rebar erupts through the center of Command Post 4, bisecting the building. The structure screams as its spine snaps. The roof caves in with a deafening roar, crushing the tactical ops center and burying a dozen personnel under tons of flaming debris. Seconds later, the foundation of Command Post 5 is hit by a following warhead, causing the entire dock to heave upward before collapsing into the churning sea. The human impact is instantaneous and brutal. Sailors stationed on the pier are hurled into the air by the heaving ground, their limbs flailing before they are swallowed by the opening fissures in the asphalt. One officer is thrown through a plate glass window, his body shredded as he falls into the burning wreckage below. Those who aren't killed by the blast are pinned by falling steel beams, their cries for help lost in the roar of secondary explosions. Medics scramble over the shifting rubble, dragging wounded men by their vests as the ground continues to settle and groan. Tactical command on the remaining shore battery is in a state of total collapse. A colonel slams his radio onto the console, yelling for any available air support to drop sonar flares, but his voice is a rasp of frustration. He realizes the attack is surgical, designed to blind the entire region's radar and communication arrays before a single troop can be mobilized. He watches through binoculars as the silhouette of the 6th command post begins to tilt, its structural integrity compromised by the massive shock waves traveling through the bedrock. The consequences are visible in every direction. The port's power grid fails, plunging the remaining sectors into a terrifying darkness lit only by the orange glow of the raging fires. Massive plumes of steam hiss as the white-hot wreckage of the command centers slides into the cold ocean water. The 6th and 7th command posts are now isolated, their personnel trapped between a wall of fire and the deep, silent threat lurking beneath the waves. The harbor has become a slaughterhouse of steel. 0250 hours, the northernmost edge of the Manzanillo industrial complex. The air here is freezing but tastes of burnt rubber and copper. Thick, greasy smoke from the southern piers has drifted north, wrapping the final 2 command posts in a suffocating gray shroud. The flickering orange light from the distant fires casts long, monstrous shadows against the corrugated steel of the warehouses. There is a frantic, chaotic energy on the ground. Soldiers are loading crates of classified documents into armored trucks, their boots splashing through puddles of spilled hydraulic fluid. The sound of heavy diesel engines idling creates a low, nervous rumble that vibrates through the soles of their feet. Inside Command Post 6, the atmosphere is one of pure, unadulterated panic. The emergency lighting flickers a dull, sickly yellow, casting deep shadows across the faces of the radar operators who are staring at dead screens. A major stands at the center of the room, his uniform disheveled, screaming into a satellite phone that provides only a mocking hiss of static. He looks at his coffee mug on the edge of the table. The liquid inside begins to ripple in perfect concentric circles. The strike on Command Post 6 is a masterpiece of underwater demolition. The heavy torpedo doesn't just hit the wall, it swims directly into the cooling intake pipe beneath the structure before detonating. The explosion is contained for a millisecond before the entire foundation of the building turns into a volcanic vent. A pillar of fire and steam blasts through the center of the floor, incinerating the briefing room and hurling the roof sections hundreds of feet into the air. The building doesn't just collapse, it disintegrates. The human reaction is a chorus of agony. Soldiers near the trucks are caught in the blast wave and thrown like dolls against the warehouse walls, their bodies crumpled and broken. Inside the ruins, survivors are buried under hot slag and twisted rebar, their lungs scorched by the superheated steam. A medic attempts to reach a pinned sergeant, but the ground beneath them gives way as the pier shelf slides into the harbor. They disappear into the black, churning water, leaving only a trail of bubbles and floating debris. The tactical director on the last remaining command post, number 7, watches the destruction through a reinforced observation slit. He is a veteran, but his hands shake as he keys the harbor-wide intercom. He doesn't give a tactical order, he tells his men to run. He realizes the Israeli submarine is playing a grim game of architectural chess, and his building is the final king to fall. He grabs a sidearm and bolts for the rear exit, leaving the high-tech sensors to record their own destruction. The aftermath is a scene of industrial ruin. 6 of the 7 nodes are now smoking craters or piles of sunken rubble. The harbor water is thick with oil and the white foam of agitated chemicals. A massive crane, its supports severed by the last blast, groans and begins a slow, majestic fall toward the 7th command post. The air is a cacophony of groaning metal, screaming sirens, and the hiss of fire meeting the sea. The defense of Manzanillo has been decapitated. 0300 hours, the tip of the Manzanillo Peninsula. The final target, Command Post 7, stands isolated against the backdrop of a horizon engulfed in flames. The air is thick with a heavy metallic fog as the smoke from the first 6 destruction zones merges into a single choking cloud. The sea around the final pier is no longer dark. It is a bruised purple, reflecting the massive fires that have turned the harbor into a furnace. A strange vacuum-like silence falls for a heartbeat, the kind that precedes a massive atmospheric shift. Inside the reinforced concrete bunker of Command Post 7, the last remaining personnel scramble toward the emergency exits. The heavy steel blast doors grind open and men stumble out into the heat, their faces illuminated by the inferno behind them. The tactical director is the last to leave, glancing back at the rows of blinking servers that represent the last brain cell of the regional defense. The floor beneath his boots begins to tilt. It is not a sudden jolt, but a slow, sickening groan of concrete being crushed by immense pressure from below. The final 2 heavy torpedoes strike the foundation pilings of Command Post 7 with a synchronized roar that shatters every window within a 2-mile radius. The explosion is a blinding white sphere that rises from the depths, lifting the entire 2,000-ton structure 5 feet into the air. The pier beneath it simply disintegrates into gravel. As the building drops back down, it hits the churning water and splits in 2. A massive shockwave slams into the shoreline, flipping armored vehicles like toys and stripping the bark off the nearby palm trees. The human toll is absolute. Those still inside the structure are crushed instantly as the ceiling slabs collapse under the weight of the upper floors. Sailors on the perimeter are swept into the sea by the resulting 10-foot surge of water, their bodies battered against the jagged remains of the pier. The tactical director is thrown 30 feet into a pile of shipping containers. He gasps for air, his ribs shattered, watching as the last vestige of his command slides beneath the oily surface of the Pacific. Black smoke roars out of the hole where the building once stood, a funeral pyre for the port's infrastructure. Deep underwater, the Israeli submarine commander watches the sonar return. The 7 distinct acoustic signatures of the command posts have been replaced by a chaotic mess of sinking debris and collapsing silt. He calmly orders a course change, the vessel banking like a silent predator into the deeper trenches of the continental shelf. His mission is a clinical success. On the sonar screens, the targets have simply ceased to exist. The aftermath is a vision of total tactical erasure. The 7 command posts, once the nerve centers of the entire coastline, are now nothing but smoking holes in the earth and twisted piles of rebar beneath the waves. The fire continues to spread along the fuel lines, turning the waterfront into a wall of flame that prevents any immediate rescue or assessment. The command structure of the port has been leveled, leaving the region blind, deaf, and defenseless. 03:15 hours, deep water exit corridor 12 miles off the Mexican coast. The ocean surface above is a chaotic tapestry of orange reflections and black oil slicks, but at 300 feet down, the world is a cold, pressurized void. The water is heavy, pushing against the submarine's hull with a constant metallic groan. Bioluminescent organisms flicker like dying stars as the massive steel shadow of the vessel cuts through the currents. Behind the ship, the faint, low-frequency rumble of the collapsing port infrastructure still vibrates through the sea, a ghostly reminder of the destruction left in its wake. Inside the control room, the atmosphere has shifted from intense aggression to a quiet, professional hum. The red battle lights have been swapped for a cool, dim blue. The air is scrubbed clean, devoid of the smoke and blood that define the surface. Operators move with rhythmic efficiency, their hands dancing over glowing touchscreens and mechanical overrides. The sonar supervisor keeps his headset pressed tight to his ears, filtering out the white noise of the burning harbor to listen for the distinctive thrum of incoming enemy turbines. The tactical situation remains precarious. On the main display, several yellow icons appear on the edge of the radar radius. Land-based interceptors and maritime patrol aircraft launched from nearby airfields. They are blind, searching for a ghost in a sea filled with acoustic clutter. The submarine commander stands at the center of the room, arms crossed, staring at the bathymetric chart. He knows the window for a clean escape is closing. He orders a steep dive into the subthermal layer, a maneuver that will hide their heat and acoustic signature beneath a wall of shifting water temperatures. The vessel tilts forward, the deck pitching at a sharp angle. Gravity pulls at the crew, but no one moves from their station. The submarine slides into the abyss, the hull creaking under the increasing atmospheric pressure as they pass 500 feet, then 600. On the sonar waterfall, the signatures of the chasing aircraft fade into a blur of static. The officers share a brief, silent look of grim satisfaction. They have decapitated a regional command structure without ever being seen, leaving the enemy to hunt shadows in a graveyard of their own making. On the surface, the direct consequences of the withdrawal are felt by the panicked coastal batteries. Without the command post to coordinate radar data, the remaining surface ships are firing blindly into the fog, their shells splashing harmlessly into the empty Pacific. The Port of Manzanillo is a leaderless wreck. The strategic silence from the submerged Israeli vessel is more terrifying than the explosions. It is the silence of a predator that has already finished its meal and vanished into the night. The aftermath of the tactical withdrawal is a clean break. The submarine levels out in the deep trench, its wake disappearing into the vast dark expanse of the ocean. Behind them, the glow of the burning port begins to fade on the long-range thermal sensors. The mission is transitioning from an active raid to a silent transit. The command nodes are gone, the harbor is crippled, and the invisible hand that struck them is now deep within the safety of the international waters. 0330 hours. The smoldering ruins of the Manzanillo waterfront. The heavy, oppressive heat of the fires has created a localized weather system, drawing in a cold wind from the sea that whips the black smoke into towering cyclones. The horizon is no longer a line but a jagged silhouette of collapsed cranes and leaning concrete skeletons. What was once the most sophisticated maritime command hub in the region is now a 2-mile stretch of scorched earth and twisted wreckage. The smell is an overpowering mix of burnt electrical insulation, spilled diesel, and the salt spray of the Pacific. The scene on the ground is one of total industrial paralysis. Emergency vehicles with flashing red and blue lights are lined up along the perimeter, unable to move forward because the very asphalt of the pier has buckled and cracked into impassable ridges. Firefighters stand helplessly at the edge of the craters where command posts 3 and 4 once stood. The intense heat from the ruptured gas mains melts the rubber of their boots before they can even deploy their hoses. The only sound is the rhythmic hiss of seawater hitting white-hot steel beams and the distant secondary pops of small arms ammunition cooking off in the debris. The human impact is etched into the faces of the survivors huddled near the triage centers. Soldiers sit on the ground, their uniforms shredded, staring blankly at the harbor where their comrades vanished. Medics work in the mud, their hands stained dark as they treat horrific blast injuries and flash burns. A group of port workers stands by a line of body bags, their heads bowed as a heavy crane, weakened by the final shockwave, finally groans and topples into the water with a thunderous splash, sending a fresh spray of oily foam over the wreckage. Tactically, the silence is deafening. In the absence of the 7 command nodes, there is no coordination. Radio operators in the field scream into their handsets, but there is no one on the other end to receive the data. The regional defense network has flatlined. Radar towers sit motionless, their dishes frozen in the direction of the last recorded impact. The coastal batteries are dark, their crews standing idle beside their guns, looking out at an empty ocean that hides the predator responsible for the carnage. The aftermath is a vision of absolute structural erasure. The 7 command posts have been deleted from the map, replaced by churning pools of seawater and mounds of smoking rubble. The economic and military heart of the port has been ripped out in less than 90 minutes. As the first hint of gray light begins to touch the eastern sky, it reveals a landscape that looks less like a port and more like a graveyard of steel. The operation is over. The silence of the morning is broken only by the crackle of the dying fires.